So I want to check if everybody can see. Can you all see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, you should be looking at a slide. It's an introductory slide, Business Relationship Management Professional. This is quite a new course and also an exciting topic that's been brewing and emerging over the past 2 years. And we've seen a lot of people doing inquiries around what is actually behind this course called Business Relationship Management Professional. And I must say what we found so far is that it is a very well prepared and well-focused course. If you want to take your understanding of business relationship management further than what you will just find in, for instance, the ITIL books around business relationship management, or even maybe in COBIT around portfolio management and how do you actually manage your relationship with your customer. So it's a well-written book, and even the body of knowledge that was developed really adds a lot of value to this course. This material is available to everybody that wants to view this. There is, however, also just some copyright that we have to make sure people are aware of. This is still owned by the Business Relationship Management Institute, and also APMG is part of the people that manages the exams for the BRM Institute. So important that people do recognize the ownership of the logos and the content. And if we can maybe start with, where did this start from? If we look at the Merwe Group, they've done a lot of research over the past 10, 15 years on the topic of business relationship management. And they've developed a lot of intellectual property. And as a lot of these, groups of people, interest groups work, they eventually start to create a more formalized and globalized presence, which is exactly what happened with the Business Relationship Management Institute, which started basically in 2013 and set themselves a goal to make sure that business relationship management gets really developed across the globe, and it starts to deliver value to organizations, and making sure that people understand from their own development path professionally what they can gain through this business relationship management body of knowledge that they've developed. And they're getting this right. As I said, it's quite a new course in South Africa, but it's well underway in the rest of the world. We're seeing a lot of this happening in the United States, in Canada. Also see a lot of this happening in Europe. And what they specifically offer as the Business Relationship Management Institute is that this is a learning community. So we're seeing more and more of the concept that all these frameworks and ways of work are actually seen as a collaborative environment, and people can add and expand to that. So you have access to this if you become part of the BRM Institute. It's also, they have a wiki which allows you to search for knowledge articles. They then have the excellent and well-written BRM body of knowledge, which is a book you can download, and the interactive body of knowledge, which you can access online. And then they also eventually made sure that we can actually now go out to the world and train people on how to improve business relationship management and actually unlock the value which sits in the relationship between the service provider and the business. And then there's also a lot of research articles available from the Business Relationship Management Institute. So that basically takes care of who started this and who's managing this in the background. So, and I must congratulate the people that's behind this. I think they've done a lot of good work. If you look at the research they've done and how they've compiled this material, interestingly enough, it's also not an IT course. It's more a management course that you will be attending. If you decide to eventually do the course, there's very specific objectives that they try and make sure that you are exposed to and you can develop when you're in the course and then beyond the course as a professional in business relations management. A very important step is to actually start to provide clarity around the role of business relations management and what is typical around this role when it is operationally executed, tactically executed, and then ultimately strategically executed. Because there's quite a big difference if you're a business relations manager that are more focused in operations and maybe a bit in tactical, you are deemed still potentially more closer to the ITIL description of business relations management, where this material and the body of knowledge that they've developed actually allows you to grow into a strategic role within business relations management, where you actually have the ability to reach into the organization with a lot more influence, and you can make sure that at the higher level in the organization you have discussions with the stakeholders that's required. Also, the importance of becoming a strategic partner. If you want to be successful in your role as a business relations manager, you need to understand the concept of strategic partnering quite well. Now, if you look at this as simplified on that slide, it's like what is behind strategic partnering. What's great about the course, they actually teach you the methods and techniques that you can use to make sure that you align strategically to where your business partner wants to go and wants to take this in the future. It's always very important to understand that IT or anybody on the supply side needs to follow the strategy on the demand side, which is where the business sits. And what is the contribution of your business strategy formulation, and how can you as a business relations manager shape the business demand for the services that your organization actually delivers? So interestingly, the word shaping business demand is most probably just a very fancy word for demand management. So it's about understanding how can you better use the services that's available on your products that's available in your catalog, and make sure that they're used by your business partner in its fullest capacity, because then you unlock the value of your portfolio of services. Also, they focus a lot on the portfolio management disciplines and the techniques that you need to use to optimize the value that you have in your portfolio. They talk about in the course things like the Boston Square. They talk about portfolio sizing and rationalization of portfolios. So it's quite a well-developed topic in the course. Also fundamental to the execution of business relations management is that you need to be able to transition within an organization. So you need to be one of the people that can really embrace change in an organization, and you can facilitate the change in an organization as a business relations manager. Also, if you gain a lot of experience in business transition management, you will start to have an influence on the value leakage that are always typical of any change in an organization. There's always barriers in organizations, which eventually makes sure that we see value that gets delivered to the end user. But the idea is that we also need to be very specific that there will be points of leakage, especially if we don't manage change well in an organization. Also, they are very clear on how this role, the business relations management role, interjects and interacts with service management. So within that context, they do reference ISO 20000, they do reference ITIL, and they also reference from a governance perspective COBIT 5. And how this all aligns to make sure that you eventually see the business needs being delivered as expected by your business partner. And also very important, and one of, I think, the highlights of this course is they focus a lot on communication. If you want to be a good business relations manager, if you want to master the art of business relationship management. It's all about how can you communicate effectively and persuasively. So can you influence people even if you're not in a position of authority, which is, I think, a common challenge for everybody. Is how do I influence demand if I'm not necessarily sitting in the exco every week? And the good thing is the better your communication skills and the better you can persuade people to actually use services, the more value they will see from your portfolio within the organization. There's also this. The exam is, as I said, this course is more a management type of course, so it teaches you a lot of management techniques that you can use in your role as a business relationship manager. So what we also see is that the course with its exam is quite tough. It's not although they see you as this is a foundation level course, you need to make sure that you prepare yourself quite well for this exam to make sure that when they test you, that you actually get the points that you should be getting. And there's also a interesting fact to this. A lot of the questions is basic definitions and then an application of what you've learned. So and this is all dealt with during the course. So yeah, it's a good course and a well-written exam, but it is a tough exam. So if you do attend the course, make sure that you prepare well for the exam. If we look at the structure of business relationship management, they focus a lot on key themes. So on day one, typically, you will go through the introduction section. They will then also introduce you to the fundamentals of business relationship management, which covers the basics. You know, what is the role of a business relationship manager? What is the difference in role if you're an operational focused BRM versus a strategic BRM? And you know, what is value? How do you optimize value for your business partner? How do you orchestrate, navigate as a business relationship manager in the organization? And then, very importantly, if you look at the screen where we see that circle diagram, you'll see that they have specific areas that they focus on. And those areas is the main body of the course and also eventually the main body of the exam. So they then go into a lot of depth around strategic partnering, which they deem a competency that you need to have if you want to be a successful business relationship manager. So within the strategic partnering section of the course, you're exposed to a lot of techniques. How do you actually get to understand the strategy of your business partner? How do you align to that? How do you facilitate discussions around that with your business partner? And how do you actually make sure that the strategy can be executed by your supply sides, which is typically in our case your IT department? The other competency they also focus on is business IQ. So what this basically boils down to is that the more experience you have and the better understanding you have of the type of business you're in. Like, let's say, for instance, you're in the mining sector or you're in the financial sector. The more you have experience of that sector and its legislative requirements and its typical control requirements, the better you will be able to articulate and understand the requirements of business back to IT. So what it basically boils down to is that a competent BRM is somebody that understands the context of the business quite well. They understand the environment in which the business needs to execute quite well. Also, one of the other competencies that they focus on is portfolio management. Very important. Within portfolio management, this is actually the competency within which your value optimization gets done, and you actually create your portfolio views of anything that will be new, so that will be still implemented into the environment, everything that is current, and everything that will be retired going forward. If you talk to people, especially when you do the course, and you ask them, do you have a portfolio management view of IT? So do you have this view where you have split your services into the group of new services that will be implemented over the next 2 years? Do you understand the investment and the risk associated with that? Also, do you have the view of the current services that you're rendering, the risk associated with that, and the ongoing investment, and then ultimately the retired services? Because what we often forget is that the total life cycle of the service eventually requires us to also retire the service. Otherwise, you sit with a lot of legacy systems that just keeps on costing you money, and you have to pay licensing around it. So it's within portfolio management a lot of value if you want to look at optimizing your portfolio of services, rationalizing your services. I mean, we find it in the industry quite a lot. If we deal with some of the bigger organizations, some of them have up to 700 applications that they have to support and that they have to pay licensing fees on. And when we do our research to assist them in understanding the portfolio, we cannot even find one person that can tell you why they need 20 of the 700 applications. So what you typically find is that there's a high level of duplication amongst applications because it's not under control. People are buying and are allowed to buy applications, at their leisure because they have got budget, and eventually you sit with a huge amount of risk in the organization. The other competency that's also important to understand is that you actually represent. So this is the service provider within the organization. Typically, it can be your IT department. So you are the face of that department. You're not the accountable person for operations, but you are the person accountable for the business relationship management role. And it's important for you to understand how do they define services, how do we make sure that we sell the services correctly, how do we catalog those services in a way that the business can easily consume. The other competency that really helps you doing your BRM role better is business transition management. Now these days, if you look at the change cycle in organizations, it is a tremendous cycle that you constantly have to manage. There's a lot of change fatigue in organizations, so people are constantly being put through changes, whether it is organizational changes, changes to technology, changes to policy or legislation. And what they're trying to do and achieve with this course as a BRM is to assist you to grow your skill set in transition management. So there's a lot of organizational change management principles that they then discuss under the context of business transition management. Also the importance of powerful communications. So you're basically as good as your ability to communicate to your customer. If you cannot articulate value to them, if you cannot articulate the services that can suit their needs, if you cannot understand, because part of communication is not just the talking part, also the listening part. If you also can't understand what they actually want, you won't be able to deliver maximum value to the organization. And then obviously the last section in the course is where they take you through the exam syllabus and a sample exam. So it's a tough 3 days. So there's a lot of new terminology in there that you will not necessarily be as familiar with if you come from the traditional environments of IT service management or governance management. But again, it's taken care of during the course. So a lot of people, they ask me, so what is this? Is it a new thing, the business relationship manager? And it's not new, but I think the application and the way people understand this role is improving a lot. If we look at the traditional view of this, the BRM is sometimes considered just as a very senior service delivery manager. What we see when we do this course is that it elevates that role significantly. And it repositions the role, and it talks about making sure that this role sits at the intersection between the service provider and the business partner. So you're almost the oil in the gearbox. You make sure that the conversation that needs to happen between the service provider and the business partner happens, and that both parties are actually on the same page, and you are the role, you represent the role that needs to facilitate all of that. Also, quite a big statement. It is expected from a business relations manager to stimulate demand. So you need to be able to understand it, and you need to understand how to influence it. You need to also be able to surface demand, which basically means you need to be able to understand if my business partner is saying I need the following, I actually have something in the background that can fulfill this. You also need to be able to then address and your environment to look at maximizing value. So your ability to influence the demand and basically the ability of your business partner to buy services is very important here. You need to be able to maximize the value of every rand that they will be spending. So you want to make sure that they do not spend money on the duplication of applications, or on buying new service that you're already rendering from IT. And that's quite an important role that you have to fulfill. And then, very interesting, you will be wearing two hats if you do this position well, because you are representing both business and the provider management teams. So especially if you're at the right level, if you are seen as a strategic business relations manager, you will be part of the management team and you will be part of the supply chain or business side of things. And this is quite influential, so you can understand both parties and how to manage that relationship and optimize the value from that. This is most probably one of the most important pictures and that they have in the entire body of knowledge within business relations management, because this explains everything that you need to master and apply if you want to be a successful business relations manager. And what they've termed this picture is the House of Business Relations Management. And I'm going to draw your attention to what's at the bottom, which is the BRM competencies. And you will remember we spoke about this 2 slides ago. There's 6 competencies that they focus on in the scores and in the body of knowledge. And what they basically tell us is, if you want to be seen as a master of business relations management, you must be able to execute these 6 competencies very well. And again, there's strategic marketing. There's a lot of techniques that they then expose you in the body of knowledge and in the course. You must be able to raise your business IQ. You must be able to implement portfolio management and maximize the value within your portfolio. Also, you need to understand the provider domain, which area you represent internally in the business. They also talk a lot about powerful communications, and then, very importantly, business transition management, which is all about organizational change. And then you will see the 4 pillars. So the 4 pillars are essential in maintaining the roof of the House of BRM. And what they say is the 4 pillars represents the 4 disciplines that you must master and you must constantly execute and practice as you perform your role. You must develop your ability to do demand shaping. You must have the ability to do exploring of the business for the needs that they have. You must have the ability to make sure that the servicing of business demand is actually at the right level. So you need to make sure that whatever is produced from the internal organization meets the business requirement. And then value harvesting. Make sure that you get the maximum value out of your portfolio of investment that you've done into your services or your products. Again, I want to use the example, if you're an organization sitting with 700 applications, of which half of them are just duplicating one another, you would like to start to address that and maybe introduce a rationalization program to take care of harvesting the value, because you don't necessarily need all of that. Then also, very importantly, this diagram then has the roof of the house, which is all about the clarity of the BRM role in the context of the provider strategy and its operating model. So you'll ask yourself, so why is this so important? Well, let's talk about this. The clarity and the way you can articulate your role in organizations is very important. Traditionally, we see when we train the course that the majority of BRMs are actually service delivery managers, but maybe a bit more senior. So they're still operating at an operational and sometimes a tactical level, but almost never at a strategic level. And it's very important to, when you start to develop the vision for business relationship management, that you make it clear that this role will change and that this role will include strategic activities. And you also need to be able to map this role back into the strategy of the provider, the internal organization, and the associated operating model. So what's great about this course, it goes into depth around the operating model of the organization that you're representing, the strategy that has created that operating model, and how you need to navigate through the model and make sure that you optimize the communication through this model and everybody understands the role of BRM. Okay, so this is for me, this is one of those power slides. If you understand this picture well, you actually grasp the content of the course and the body of knowledge quite well. They also use the BRM metaphors. So they talk about business relationship manager as a navigator, so somebody that can help us to steer the ship in the right direction. Also, the BRM is a connector. What do you often find is that IT department exists in an organization, but they hardly ever speak to the right people in business. So what this role needs to do is they actually have to connect the two different departments and allow for that open discussion. So the BRM must connect the two and facilitate the discussion to look at how the internal department can actually service the business. Also, BRM is seen as an orchestrator of resources and effort. So the better you understand the operating model, the more you can influence it. The better you understand the buying and supply chain model in the organization, the more you can influence that. So your ability to orchestrate actions and activities to make sure that we deliver against expectations is quite important for a BRM. So again, they use the metaphors, and then obviously during the course and in the body of knowledge, they're going to quite a lot of depth around these three concepts. And I think it's very relevant to the role, and the better you're at this, and the more it comes naturally, the more benefit for the entire organization. And then they start with a lot of diagrams that you will be exposed to during this course. And this is where where the more you go through the course, the more you will see that, it's actually more a management course versus the traditional type of IT course that we see. One of the very important models that you get exposed to in the body of knowledge and in the course is the business/provider maturity model. And what this basically tries to achieve is to show both business and IT, if you are representing IT, what is the current level of maturity between the organizational entities. And what you'll find is that it will be very difficult for the business to be at a high level of maturity if IT is also not there. So this is run through a normal S-curve or a sigmoid curve, and then they teach you how to actually calibrate this model and then use it to go and assess what is the current maturity strength between business and provider. And it speaks specifically to the demand side of business, which you'll find with the top left part, and also the supply side, which is in the bottom right of the slide. So whether you're sitting on the supply side of the relationship or the demand side of the relationship, this slide speaks to both parties, and it is used as a slide to facilitate how do we create value from this. So if you look at the right on the slide, you'll see that there's a dotted line there called value. And what you basically can put down for a typical IT organization when you're having a meeting with senior business management is you can tell them, let's quickly try and understand at what maturity are we in this organization, IT and also business. And are we at level 1? So we're just still trying to provide basic systems and services. We're still trying to stabilize operations. Are we at a level 2 or eventually at a level 3? Now you are allowed, and this is the beauty of the course, to calibrate this to further levels. In the course they calibrate it up to a level 3. Again, it's more for us to understand the concept behind it and the importance of making sure people understand what is the current maturity in the organization. And we've tested this. If we do this in the classroom, the highest score we ever get out of 10 is a 6 against the questions you ask when you do the assessment. Some organizations, when they do their in-class assessment, they get a 4 out of 10, and which is again indicative of the fact that most probably the majority of organizations is currently at a level 1 maturity when it comes to how are they making sure that they can actually deliver against the demand of the organization. So for me, again, a significant slide to take further in organization, and again, the moment you understand how the slide works, you can really drive improvement programs in your organization. Some of the responsibilities is also very key in understanding the role of BRM. So what's interesting is they're very specific in the body of knowledge and in the course that they talk about tactical BRM and strategic BRM. And there's a big difference between the two, because we're seeing that the typical environment is the environment described in the blue block, the first block, where you're still operating at the level where you're looking out for operations and potentially some tactical stuff, where the strategic BRM is operating at and you see terminology like ensure strategic alignment between the business strategy and the provider and the capabilities required for that, jointly being accountable for the business case and the portfolio. Now if you look at this and the difference between strategic versus the tactical role, you can see, yes, this is definitely an uplift of the role out of just traditional IT service management. So if you look at the first block and what they describe there, you'll see that they basically still talk about making sure IT service management is up and running, making sure that you have governance in place. Where within strategic BRM, they take it to the next level. So you're interfacing with typically the ExCo level, and you have the ability to influence demand and shape demand significantly compared to your role as a tactical BRM. And it's interesting, the moment you present the slide, people say, hey, I can see myself in the first block. And then you ask them, so what's keeping you from moving into the strategic BRM? And then everybody is like, yeah, but that's where we need to get. And that's the whole point of the course and of the body of knowledge. You should be looking at a way of actually improving the role and elevating the role to a strategic BRM capability. They also, during the course, discussed the typical RACI, which is your responsible, accountable, consulted and informed mapping. And they have the typical roles there, and they plot it out. Now this is very generic. This obviously you will have differences in different organizations. You will also have to tailor this. But what they basically say is that if you are a BRM, you're going to play a big role in the multi-year strategy within an organization, especially if you're operating at a strategic level. If you're BRM, you are part of ideation, which is creating ideas, writing down ideas on paper, and then starting to analyze whether those ideas can produce further value in the organization. You will be consulted during design, you'll be consulted during testing, and then very, very interestingly enough, if you look at the row and the column where we have BRM and maintenance and operations, suddenly this body of knowledge says, and when you're in maintenance and operations, you'll just be informed. And I usually I stop and I ask the students, is this the way it operates in your organization? And everybody comes back and say, no, they're actually keeping me responsible as the BRM for maintenance and operations. And this is typically one of the biggest barriers that we currently see, is that if we have to map it to this generic RACI in the maintenance and operations column, that role is you carry a responsibility there in your environments, whereas they recommend you're only going to be informed. So it's quite a drastic change to the role and your involvement in operations. And obviously the last column would be value optimization, where you will also play a role from a responsibility point of view. Now if you quickly have a look at this, and you need to translate this back to the service life cycle as described in ITIL. What this basically tells you is that the BRM role plays a big part in service strategy and a big part in continual service improvement. So if you look at the column, multi-year strategy, you're responsible for a lot of things. You're looking out for ideas, and you do analysis of the viability of ideas, which is a lot what we talk about in ITIL in service strategy. And what do we also talk a lot about in ITIL in continual service improvement? The value optimization of services. And then you will see that design, testing, and operations, which is basically your design phase in ITIL, transition and operations phases, you're playing more a consultative / informed role. So a very quick mapping to, how does this relate to an ITIL service life cycle, and then you'll see, okay, there's quite a big difference. So yeah, this usually creates a lot of debate when you're sitting with the students. Okay, so the question is, why do we suddenly have this big push in the environment and people talking about business relationship management? Well, first of all, and it's important to note that your ISO 20000 standard does give us very good guidance around definitions for service, for an IT service, what is involved in that, and how do you develop services, and also ITIL do include business relationship management. But as I said, this course will take it a lot further than what you will typically only find in ITIL, and also the skills framework for the information age. And then also there is currently a huge need for IT to actually be aligned with where business is going. So we're still seeing IT typically being a commodity or order taker to business, and business decide where they want to go. We also see that there's a lot of global capabilities now. If you look at the cloud capabilities these days, if you can access and pay with a credit card, and 12 minutes later you can have a hosting environment deployed that you can install your applications on. Now that is a big risk for IT, because IT, the traditional IT in-house, will find it potentially very difficult to deploy within 12 minutes. And who stops the CEO from just using a cloud provider to host something? Yeah, there might be legislation that stops him, but again, the questions are being asked. IT, internal, why are you not as flexible and scalable as the cloud providers? And this is why I think a lot of people are asking these questions. And then also the business is demanding higher levels of innovation and agility from IT. And it's not easy to be innovative and agile in an environment that's very flat. I mean, the IT budgets for organizations is not really growing. In fact, a lot of organizations are saying, please cut your budget, but please provide us with innovative solutions and be as agile as possible. And then the other big shift is from alignment to convergence. Are you really integrated with your business partner? Are you just somebody that's going to try do the traditional alignment and you still run a lot of your own policies and processes, or are you going to become part of the business process itself? Now, if you look at very successful organizations, the way they've dealt with IT, and especially as an internal division, they've actually made them part of the full business process. So the silo called IT and that department where we just always throw money at them, we don't see value, they've actually lifted them out of that. They've integrated them into the business process. And what we also see these days is that business is becoming a lot cleverer in their own savviness around IT, and they are also self-sufficient. If you believe as IT that you're going to dictate what business can and cannot do and how you will be meeting demand, you may be in for a surprise in the future that they will say, well, we can maybe just use an external party for that. So again, this is driving a lot of that discussion. Yes, we have service management standards and best practices, so we have basically an introduction to business, but it's still not enough, because we still have to make sure that we need to see the strategic alignment between business and your service provider, and then eventually even go beyond just alignment and full convergence or full integration into your business partner. So yeah, quite a tall order for IT these days. So some of the research, the BRMI survey, which was done in 9 countries with 47 business relationship managers, and they asked how does it typically, feature in the org structure within a business. And what they typically found is that most organizations will create a separate division that will be running BRM, and it will typically be for IT or another shared services division, or they will group them by business process, and then sometimes there's also a grouping by geography or a hybrid model that you can have. So we find a lot of similarities when we do our classes, that the people say, yes, we are actually from the business unit this, and we are part of that structure there. So this speaks back to that.
Andre?
When you look at South Africa, yeah.
Sorry, we are running out of time. You only had an hour slot, and I see we're not even halfway through yet. But if we can just wrap up, I know there are a few questions that have come through that the guys would like to ask.
Yeah. So also important, this is available. So if at the end people want to email me with further questions, that's very easy to do, and we can take the discussion further. Okay. So
can we do the Q&A here as well?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay. So Andre, I know you still have a lot to share, but we have to cut it short. We still have another speaker that has to come in. So can I quickly just do the Q&A?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So the first question here is, what level should the BRM be? First level manager, senior manager, CIO, or board level?
That's interesting, which is the slide we're on, which is the career path. So what you typically see is that being a successful BRM can open the door to being the CIO. So if you have a very high business IQ and you have the ability that you understand portfolio management, transition management, and the provider domain, you are a very strong candidate for a CIO position. What do we see traditionally is that BRMs in South Africa are senior service delivery managers, which is not necessarily the optimal what we want to see.
Okay. Next question here is, how do you measure business IQ?
That's a very good question. And especially if you look at the definition of that. So if you look at people's experience in an industry, if you look at their exposure to risk in the industry, their exposure to drivers in the industry and where the industry is going, that is how you will be measuring the IQ level, the business IQ level of an individual. It will be very difficult if your background is mining, and for the past 20 years you've been working in the mining industry as a BRM, to go and suddenly add a lot of value in the financial services industry, because you do not understand the legislative requirements there. You do not understand the risk profile of that environment. So it's all about what are you used to, what can you speak to based on your experience that you have.
Okay. Who owns the service portfolio?
Well, the service portfolio is defined by the provider. So the CIO will typically develop his portfolio of services because that is what they expose to the business and make sure that they can use that. However, do they have the final say in financial approval? No. They will typically have to provide business cases so that the investment that's required for the portfolio is approved through the right investment committees in the organization. So in the bigger organizations, there will be a defined governance layer, and there might even be a defined investment committee, which the CIO will have to go and represent what they need within their portfolio to make sure that they cover the full service line.
Thank you. The next question here is, why would there be applications on the service portfolio?
Oh, that's easy. Within service portfolio management, you find two very big groupings. You have your technology portfolio and your applications portfolio. Now, this, especially if it's within a IT environment. So if you look at your infrastructure portfolio or your applications portfolio, there's huge money in those portfolios that they invest. If you look at the associated costs of large enterprise resource planning systems and the applications that's available there, you have to understand that you have an applications portfolio, you have a technology portfolio which rolls up into a services view or a services portfolio, and you need to optimize those portfolio views, and you need to optimize them for what is new, what is current, and what are we retiring. So it's quite a big exercise to do this, but it's very important that you constantly appraise your portfolio and apply some form of value optimization to that.
Okay, thank you. And the last question here is, how does strategic BRM fit with service governance?
Yeah, can you just repeat that, please?
How does strategic BRM fit with service governance?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so strategic BRM means you're now operating at typically an ExCo level, and ExCo level typically reports back into the board. So you will be much closer and much more aligned to what the board needs to develop and own from a governance perspective. So if you look at especially the COVID framework, the very first 5 processes that they describe for the governance of enterprise IT, you will be exposed to that and you'll have input into that. Whereas if you're most probably an operational BRM, you'll sit down in the organization, maybe in the deliver and support layer, not as close to the governance layer as you would typically be if you were at strategic layer, part of the ExCo. Make sense?
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the audience? Nothing? Peter, can you just wrap it up for us, please?
Do you all have my email address?
I will send a chat with your email address in it.
Okay. Yes, thanks a lot, Andre. That was really great. We've got that Twitter address. I don't know if that's your own address or Pink's, is it, Andre?
What is the address?
Oh, it's Pink.
Van der Merwe, Pink Elephant. Yeah.
Oh, I haven't got that one. Just I think ITM. Okay.
Yeah, that's the Twitter handle.
But thank you very much. That was great. That was really interesting, and it's great to know what Pink's involved with BRM. So that was brilliant. And thanks. We're looking forward to the next presenter. So all the best.
Thank you, Andre.
Thanks.
Adriaan, I think we're up to you now. I'm just going to hand over the screen again to you if you give me a moment. Adriaan, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. I'm just waiting for the screen.
Super.
Just sharing the screen to you when you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen now.
You can see my screen. Okay, all right. I think we're an audience in reduced circumstances, but here we go. I think the topic that I chose here is sometimes contentious because we are experts in root cause analysis. People quite often ask us about root cause once they had security issues. And our natural reaction is mostly, but this is too late. Root cause analysis is not worth that much anymore except knowing what the heck happened, because you should have actually prevented this. So this actually caused us to think quite a lot about it, and hence cybersecurity and root cause as a title for this. Now, the big thing about cybersecurity, and we are not technical experts, we are thinking experts and process experts, is that it would seem that the devices connecting to the internet just seems to keep on. And what we have is a situation where the budgets don't necessarily keep up with this particular scenario. So the whole thing is that information is lost regularly these days, and it would seem that the cost of a single breach where people lose information, the cost of fixing the damage and the professional reputation issues, all that, could be estimated approximately at $3.5 million US. Now, this is a hectic number, not necessarily true, it's a kind of an average, but still this is severe if this happens to you. So the question is really, what's it worth to the general person? And if you look at the surveys going on, it's no longer a case of if a company is going to have a breach, it is when are they going to have one, or when is somebody going to try. So what we have to do is to say to ourselves, but this is dangerous, this is going to cost us money, and therefore we need to really think about security in our environments. Now, the difficulty that we have at the moment is that security is largely a technical argument. It doesn't bring people and process into it. So, yeah, we need to think about what's the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, but we should not focus on the actual technical aspects alone. It is critical that we do the technical stuff, but we need to enrich the technical thinking. So the long-term solution to all of this is that we need internally people who can actually focus on this. Now, most companies have security people, but to our chagrin, we actually worked with a couple of clients to find out they've got nobody. Now, I don't know about what your thoughts would be, but I think that's downright dangerous if you don't have anybody on the inside looking at the potential of security breaches and the issues that actually go with it. Now, what's the impact of a breach on you? It is severe. So what we're saying is there need to be a long-term solution to reduce the probability that a breach will occur. And any plan that gives you less than 50% reduction in that probability is probably not good enough. So this is what people are currently doing. They actually focus on awareness, and they tell everybody about security issues and the like. But they are entirely reactive. They operate in the defensive mode. And what we're saying is that you should turn this to be proactive and to start to build some resilience into your IT and business environment to make sure that this risk is actually mitigated. Now, what we often see is that your chief risk officer is quite junior, and I think we saw in Andre's thing that he's of the same view on the business relationship manager. Now, we don't necessarily see the CRO as a job on its own. It's rather a role, but that role should reside with a fairly senior person. Else the impact they can make will not be very good. So we need to get away from fixing the problem afterwards, and we need to get away and beyond just awareness training, and we need to do a holistic plan to deal with these issues. And that's where it aligns with what we do. So we are professional problem solvers. So what's the problem we see that people need to address? It is they're not thinking in a systematic way about solving their cybersecurity problems. It's ad hoc, in different spaces, and whoever makes the most noise gets budget to fix issues. But what we need to do is look at the overall thing, the problem, the underlying causes, and how we can proactively deal with those particular issues. So in stating that problem, I think the big thing is we need to understand that we could be attacked maliciously. Sometimes the attacks aren't malicious, but they are equally damaging to us. But this is normally by an external threat actor. Or alternatively, it could be internal. It could be a past employee who's got some beef with us and they're going to harm us. And what we need to make sure is that they are not successful, because if they are successful, that means we've got a vulnerability somewhere. And this is the scenario that we need to analyze and think about at a pretty high level when we speak about cybersecurity. So what would you do? You'd actually gather information about this particular scenario. So what is it that we want to look at? We want to look at the processes we use and the technology. And we want to make sure that the vulnerabilities are known to us. You know, people through just ignorant actions do strange things sometimes. They don't mean us harm, but they create a gap in our armor, and the next thing, somebody comes through that gap. So the biggest possibilities or breach potentials typically we have found comes from legacy processes, where people still use these. They have to use them, but they're cutting corners because it's frustrating. The second one would be where there are processes that typically has a lot of non-value add or bureaucracy in it, where people tend to ignore certain things because they don't think it adds value, and because of that, a critical aspect is overlooked. And then just omissions, generally speaking. But all of that does not work well until we really consider the processes. It is how people work with the processes, how the processes interact within the organization and outside the organization. And now, if we have a process, we have some rules and policies that are applicable to that. That's the two sides of the matrix. You've got process, and then you've got all the rules and the policies that apply to all of these things. So there's 6 variables that we typically propose when an analysis has to be done at a high level to really focus this. And the first 3 is basically, A, what is the process? You know, is it just the email? Is it a secure login process? Is it a business-to-business process pushing out a request for proposal? It is important that we know what we are working with. And then in that particular process, we have threat actors. Now, the easiest way to look at a threat actor would be to say, why would somebody who wants to get into our systems be interested? Now, money is a typical one. Credit card information is a typical one. Those are threat actors. And there is then therefore, based on the interest of that party, a probability that that breach could occur. Now, the level of detectability is then often an issue because people get into our systems and often we don't even know. And we are not sure what kind of disruption this would cause. Sometimes there is no disruption, it is that subtle, and then suddenly afterwards you find that you have collateral damage. So if you take those 4 together, what you will end up with, and if you score them, you can end up with, can I manage this? Can I manage it if this does happen to me? So you can develop a kind of a prioritization for this security environment of yours. So here are the 4 on the right-hand side. We're working with probability, detectability, level of disruption, and manageability. So that's what the items 1, 2, 3, and 4 are, and we would score those for a process. You'll see the example here is an authentication process. We would score it for a process. So the processes are vertically in columns. Horizontally, you would have your threat actor. So, and there could be quite a few of these. We have a standard list of about 15 or so, but generally there would be more of them. So you can have a significant number of processes over the top in columns and threat actors down the left in the rows. So eventually you would end up by multiplying item 1, item 2, 3, and 4 to get a score for livability. Now, here is just an example. We have created scales with descriptions, so it is not rocket science to do this, but we have these scales for all the items. But based on the scores eventually, we need to decide what combination of threat actors and processes gives us the biggest probability of an issue or for a security breach, as well as what the impact of that could be. So here is just an example. So you can see the authentication process here, and external browsing by staff has got a large number of red blocks in it. So those two processes are candidates to be looked at in terms of security. Then horizontally, you can see application difficulties and issues. This threat actor has also got a large number of red blocks, and so does the hardware row have a lot of red blocks. Now, based on this, you can now develop a high level, what we call a heat map, to decide where the issues are. And we need to then use this as an intro and link up to ITIL to say, well, here is space for our continual service improvement. And we use improvement projects to address our security issues. So the outputs from that heat map therefore identifies the processes with vulnerabilities, as well as the hotspots coming from the left that we need to attend to. And that's what we're trying to get into people's heads, is to say technology is good, process is good, but you need to add some logical, system-driven thinking, else you're bound to fail. So once we've got this heat map up, what you really have done is you've identified the needles in the haystack. Because if you really just start evaluating every single technical aspect, which you should do at the lower levels, it can take a very long time. But what we want to end up with is processes that have weaknesses, practices and policies that have weaknesses, and incidents that are going to give us a hard time. So you need to develop some resilience in-house. You need to develop a set of in-house skills to actually deal with this. We just call it cybersecurity solution experts. Now, this excludes the technical stuff. We assume it must already be there. We assume the processes are there. What we do is offer is to say that the people don't necessarily have the thinking to bring these things together when they interact with others in the environment. So it is a set of thought processes and tools and templates to help people understand their cybersecurity issues so that they can plan to actually deal with those particular issues. The industries that we find that talk to us most about this is finance, and largely one understands that because there's money involved. A surprise to us was manufacturing. Now we guess that must be about intellectual property. But yes, those are the two industries that take the brunt of it at the moment. The good news is I think things are coming to a head. I think the thinking in organizations are improving. We're seeing at the high levels in organizations, they do pay a lot more attention to it, although we don't see the budgets moving at the same pace. Now, the budgets don't necessarily have to grow all that fast always, but the logic is that if we look at the cost of breaches as they are reported by various studies, then we probably need to invest more in the cybersecurity space. So this is late in an afternoon, so I'm trying to keep this short. So if there are questions, I'm happy to answer those questions.
Thank you so much, Adriaan. There is a question that came through on how should process design be adapted to improve defenses?
Okay, how should process design be adapted to improve defenses? So I think the initial design of a process should go ahead as we traditionally understand it, because you need to put a version on the table. Before you actually then go forward and implement a process like that, and that's part of the tool set we work with, you should do a continuity planning exercise on that process to say, well, that process has two key factors, and that is there are critical inputs that stabilizes that process, and there are critical outputs that has to be managed, because if they fall into the wrong hands, there's going to be an issue. So you need to do a continuity analysis of that new to-be process as part of the tail end of design to ensure that you can actually deal with threats, threat actors, so that they do not breach your process.
Thank you. The next question is there another approach through services rather than just processes?
This is a moot point. You know what, it all depends what you understand process to be. So we have two groups of processes. The one group is formally recorded, and it says this is the way things work. Now, services typically is a bucket or a container that says, here is the service offering for you, and therefore there could be multiple processes in there. So yes, you can replace the vertical columns in our heat map potentially with services or groups of services and do the analysis equally effectively. I do not see that that's going to impede us in any way.
Thank you for your answer. Guys, are there any further questions for Adriaan here? Doesn't seem like it. Peter, if you can just wrap up our session for today.
Yes, thank you very much, Auntie. That was a very interesting presentation. You covered quite a lot, and it was nice to see it from a fairly high level through processes. I think that makes a lot of sense rather than just technical stuff. I hope everybody else has also enjoyed the presentations as much as we have, and thank you very much for joining us. This is the last of the three presentations for last of the 3 days of presentations, I should say, not presentations for SMEXA 2016. And please let us know how you found them and whether it's been a good experience. And we look forward, based on our experience, to either doing more like this or more likely doing more based on how we could improve what we've been doing so far. So thank you very much, everybody, and all the best.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Peter. Have a good day.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.